Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar on identifying and developing future leaders. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items before we introduce and turn it over to Susie. So a lot of questions come up. Will there be Q&A after the webinar? Yes, the plan is to do about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation and then do a short Q&A about 15 minutes long, and we'll make sure we get everybody out at 10:45. Another question that comes up quite often is, will the recording and slides be available? And a lot of times we offer the recording and the slides to attendees only. So make sure to check your email after the event, probably a day later, and we'll send the recording out once we get all of that finished up. And then how can you connect with Xenium? Go to our website at www.xeniumhr.com, and you can subscribe to our email updates. There's a little field at the very sidebar of the website. Put in your email and your first name, and you can get all of our email updates to events and other content that we get out there to everybody. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So about our presenter, Susie Allagood. Apologize. A little too far. Susie has over 17 years of experience in HR and with a lot of expertise in senior leadership and management of HR departments as well. And most recently, she has been our training and development director at Xenium, and she's developed a wonderful curriculum at Xenium, and we have about 2 to 3 workshops per month, and you can find all the event information on our website as well, and we'll make sure to follow up and provide you with the calendar for the entire year as well. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Susie and pass it over to her.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your time today. Let's move on to the next slide here. Brandon, can you help get to the next slide for us? Thank you. Okay, so identifying, developing, and retaining leaders with the right talents and effectively managing a dynamic succession plan are prerequisites for organizational growth and success. Yet many organizations don't really have a formal process to identify and develop leadership talent, or only consider succession planning when there's a leadership crisis. So a key task for HR professionals and managers is developing the company's next generation of leaders. While organizations can benefit from bringing in new talent, certainly with some outside perspective, it is generally less expensive to retain and develop homegrown talent than to hire from the outside. So a lot of experts recommend creating in-house leadership development programs that identify those high potential employees and put them through structured programs, including mentorships, training workshops, stretch assignments, and coaching. The goal is to elevate those candidates above a single function and give them a broader vision of the company and equip them with the capabilities to deliver on future business objectives. So having a strategy and framework for developing a leadership pipeline within your organization is not only critical to business growth, but also for retaining your current top talent, enhancing performance, and ensuring proper succession planning. Next slide. So in order for a leadership development program to be successful, there has to be organizational support. And this includes buy-in and sponsorship from executive leadership, as well as a culture that values learning and development. And HR has a key strategic opportunity here to design and implement processes, talent management specifically, that align talent with the business plan. And this starts with understanding the business plan and then articulating the business case for leadership development. And as with any HR initiative, there must be a link to business results with some form of measurement and evaluation built into the process to ensure that you're achieving your desired outcomes. Recruitment, retention, turnover, and performance metrics can be used to set benchmarks. When looking specifically at leadership development, let's go to the next slide. The most basic process or cycle consists of planning, assessment, and then development, with evaluation, of course, built into each phase. So we will examine processes and activities associated with each phase. As an overview, the planning phase consists of understanding and aligning business strategies with talent management. The assessment phase is focused on evaluating individuals within the organization concerning their readiness and willingness to grow into organizational leaders. And then talent development includes the design and implementation of programs and corresponding activities that support growth at the organizational and individual levels. So phase one is talent planning. So we'll be looking at strategies and competencies. Next. An organization needs to embark on a leadership gap analysis before implementing successful leadership development or succession planning program. The first step is to identify which leadership competencies are most vital to executing the future strategy the company has targeted. So once the leadership competencies are identified, the second step is to assess the capabilities of the organization. And this exercise will expose the disparity between what the talent is and what it needs to be, and then allows the company to focus resources in the most effective areas. And then the final step is to incorporate those mission-critical competencies into the appropriate development plans. Competencies are the skills, behaviors, and attitudes that lead to high performance. And it's really important that key stakeholders, such as executives and HR, are involved in the development of competencies. So while your position objectives define what needs to be accomplished by the various roles within your organization, competencies define how one behaves and achieves success in a role. While you may look at differentiators when you're assessing your top performers, so what makes those folks stand out as top performers, and apply that analysis to developing competencies, really the key is to emphasize future competencies when you're looking for development. So you're really wanting to look at your corporate level growth plans and what the future needs are going to be, and more focus on those more heavily than the current performance when you're choosing employees for leadership development. Some common mistakes with competency development can include selecting non-critical competencies that everyone should ideally have. So integrity might be an example of that. Another possible example could be failing to select leveraging indicators that make a difference in performance, but that many of your people do not have or possess. So for example, through the Lawmanger's group research, they found that motivating others, managing vision and purpose, and building effective teams are all ranked high in importance, but are among the low end of manager skills. So those would be important to include. Also, failing to select leading indicators required for future performance. Examples may be developing others and strategic agility. Another consideration could be a competitive edge. So those would be competencies that few people have and are in low market supply. So key things here are ensuring that your competencies that you're developing are focused on the corporate level growth plan and really focused on the future business needs. When defining competencies, the Lawmanger Architect tool, which can be found online, and I've also included a link to a really good white paper. It's a research-based, scientifically validated tool used by organizations to profile and assess leadership behaviors. So there's really not a need to start from scratch. Lawmanger provides a library of about 67 possible competencies and descriptions, and so these competencies can be used to create success profiles for roles within your organization. Of course, you'll want to narrow down to the most essential competencies for success in a given role, and competencies will vary by level of leadership and technical or functional role, and they can be categorized as core competencies, which would be required of all leaders, for example, and role-specific competencies, which would be critical to success in a particular role or function. They can also be grouped by theme, such as business, operating, and people skills. And the number that you have for each position really depends on the number that accurately predicts high performance. In my experience, usually 10 to maybe 15 is pushing it as max, because sometimes it's hard for people to really wrap their head around that, and there's an easy opportunity to let it creep up into those high numbers and lose track of what's really important. But it's really individual for an organization based on their business needs. So while we were discussing development planning, ideally you're going to be aligning all of your HR practices, whether it be hiring and selection, performance management, and recognition rewards, with your competency models. But of course today we're talking about development. So next slide, I have an example, as an illustration. Here's an example of how one may identify competencies based on a business model. So based on a new product development and record year for sales, the new 5-year business plan is to double its revenue over the next 5 years. So this will require that the organization hire additional talent and obtain expertise, especially in technical and leadership roles, in order to develop and deliver products and services, not only locally but internationally. And this will also result in expansion and interface with other business units in geographical locations. So if you're looking at this as being your future needs and what the leader competencies may be in terms of core competencies, here are some examples that may come up as possible options. So strategic agility, obviously, is where someone has the ability to see ahead clearly, can anticipate future consequences and trends, has broad knowledge and perspective, future-oriented, and build competitive and breakthrough strategies and plans. Building effective teams obviously would be important because you're having to add to or grow your team in order to achieve the objectives. Change management obviously is important because strategic goals for change and aligning changes with the strategic direction will be really important. And then culture competence is definitely important, as this particular business plan requires interface with other geographical locations, possibly globally. Process management, since we're talking about operations leadership in terms of a functional role, process management obviously would be really important to ensure that you have a very clearly defined process, and the individual is adept at figuring out processes necessary to get things done and knows how to organize people and activities around that. There would be likely probably more than 5 competencies. Here's just an example, but here are some that may be relevant. If the example was a product development and marketing function, on the other hand, you may have competencies such as creativity and innovation management. So I wanted to just give you some sense of how it might look based on the business requirements. So going on, once you've identified your competencies and your success profile, which could include knowledge, skills, and requirements, the next step is to evaluate how your supply of talent supports the needs of the business. So managers and HR should evaluate their teams or their people on the following basis. The first main question is, in which areas are we meeting and also not meeting business demands and objectives? So you may evaluate in terms of technical and industry skills, business skills, people skills, culture fit, and diversity. What are the strengths of your team? What are the weaknesses? And of course, with your weaknesses, they should be addressed probably in your performance management process sooner rather than later. What is the potential for advancement within my current team? So that would be based on demonstrated performance and expressed career interests. And then, do I anticipate changes to my team due to transfer, separation, retirement, and how soon? Second big question is, based on these future business demands and competencies needed, where are the greatest gaps and opportunities for development? And that could include not only just the number of people, but also the specific capabilities needed. So on to phase 2. Once you've completed your needs assessment, you can look to conduct talent review and assessment. So some companies focus all of their succession planning efforts on high potential individuals, whereas others create a succession plan for everyone. It's available for everyone. The benefit of focusing on high potential workers is that you can channel more resources and coaching towards those employees with the greatest promise. The risk is that you may potentially overlook great people and frustrate or demotivate the rest of the employees. So one way to approach this is to conduct talent reviews on a scheduled basis. It could be quarterly or annually, and even in conjunction with your performance review process, especially if you have a focal process. So talent assessment for leadership. When identifying employees for leadership development, best practice is to involve both frontline supervisors all the way up to senior level management. This helps ensure accurate assessment, so there's some calibration there, and then alignment with the strategic direction. So evaluation should be focused on a candidate's ability, engagement, and aspiration. In other words, candidates must be able to demonstrate both the performance, potential, actually three things. It must be able to demonstrate the performance potential and the desire to lead in your organization. A talent review may consist of the process, a group discussion of key talent only, a review of performance and potential of each member of the team using a model such as the Lominger 9-box or a simple willing able 4-box diagram, which I'll show you in a minute, discussion of strengths and development needs, and then identifying readiness for future roles and assignments. The objectives of the talent review should be assessment of leadership bench strength, identification of the quote hypos, and a plan for those employees with the potential to provide an excellent return on your development dollars invested. And then, of course, the development plan for those employees or leaders, current leaders whose skills are out of date. Other means of assessing leadership potential outside of the talent review could be expanding performance reviews to include a 360 feedback component, or even use of assessment instruments that measure ability, specifically cognitive ability and interests, career interests. So examples could be like the Profiles XT product that Profiles International has, and then the Hogan assessments. Larger organizations that have HRIS systems may also have the ability to data mine employees by having information on employee performance, special skills, and career interests, which is a nice way to access information. So here on the next slide is an example of the Lominger 9-box model for talent review. And you'll see the 4 boxes in the top right portion are the focus for development and for advancement. So on the vertical axis, we're measuring low to high potential, and then on the horizontal axis, it's low to high performance. So this is the discussion and the calibration sessions between the management team in terms of looking at individuals within the organization and placing them in these boxes based on the assessment and the information that we had. So the top middle box would constitute a growth employee. So these people demonstrate high potential to advance further. So the prescription for them would be challenge, reward, recognize, and develop. The top right box would be your future leaders. So these people have the highest potential for senior succession. So you definitely want to have a plan for rewarding, recognizing, promoting, and developing these people. So this is your top focus for leadership development that we're talking about today. And then the middle box are your core employees. So of course you want to motivate, engage, and reward those folks for being consistent performers. And then the middle right box is the high impact performer. And they're strong contributors. So of course you want to challenge, reward, grow, and motivate those folks. Okay. On the next slide, there is a more simplified model that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. It's called Willing and Able Assessment, and it may be more fitting for smaller organizations. So it's similar in that it groups employees based on performance and ability, and then also their potential or willingness to grow and advance. So of course in that top left column will be your leaders, your identified leaders and folks that you would want to develop individual plans for their leadership development and succession. So moving on to the third phase, which is the actual design and development. This phase involves designing leadership development opportunities that can be framed or used within individual development plans. So there's generally not a one-size-fits-all approach, as each individual has varying strengths and development potential. The key, though, is to provide the structure and some resources that can be leveraged based on the individual's development needs. So with regard to leadership development programs, here are some best practices. So number one, as I mentioned before, you really want to create individual development plans, and that's linking personal objectives to the company's plans for growth. You also want to make sure, just like you would in your performance management process, but even more important here, is to hold regular open dialogues between these high potentials and the program managers to monitor the employee's development and satisfaction. And it's always important to have some frequent communication and emphasize how their development fits into the company's plans. You want to make sure that any training courses that you're offering, whether they be live, online, internally, in-house programs or externally, are targeted at the specific development needs versus just saying, hey, let's just have some general leadership training. So go back to those competencies and your success profile and make sure you're really aligning the training course content objectives with those competencies. Stretch assignments are growth-oriented exercises with some inherent risk, so they're designed to push people past their skill level, and even making some mistakes can offer some valuable lessons that can add new skills, improve confidence, and solidify commitment. The goal here, though, is to challenge but not overload people beyond their capabilities. So frequent evaluations with them will help you catch and address problems early on. Job rotation, you'll want to give participants first-hand experience in many different roles throughout your company. This helps build business perspective, and they'll gain exposure to different areas of the business and also gain some new expertise. Mentoring programs are a great option where both parties mutually benefit. So typically employees are paired with more senior employees of their company, though some programs match employees with mentors at other firms even. You want to create guidelines for the relationship. So when the partners meet for the first time, they should determine the mechanics of the relationship, when they'll meet, how often, how they will communicate outside those meetings. And partners should get to know each other before tackling specific issues. Spending time discussing work styles, personalities, and backgrounds helps build trust that can pay off later. And another thing you may consider is setting up mentoring programs between veterans, your legacy long-term employees, maybe that are even nearing retirement. So pairing those folks up with your high potential future leaders, and consider ways to even keep older workers on tap even after they've retired through part-time arrangements. And then lastly, really make a point to reevaluate top talent annually for possible changes in their ability, engagement, and aspiration levels, and consider providing an opt-out option. Not every candidate will have what it takes, nor may they have the continued desire to do so. So selection really should be an ongoing process and doesn't necessarily require that every new participant start at the same time. So you can always be adding people to your program. So moving on to designing a potential curriculum for development, it's really important that employees not only see a visible framework that outlines career paths based on your organizational structure, but that they also have a set of development activities and recommendations associated with mastery of the required competencies for each role within the career path. So it's important to provide employees as well as their managers and even mentors with development resources to set them up for success. So you may consider building a curriculum based on your success profiles. Here is an example, a simplified example, of course, based on two different competencies, change management and talent acquisition. which is part of building effective teams. And this could be, an example like this could be referenced by the employees as they set their leadership development plan goals. So ideally, you would want to include all the competencies and some corresponding development options for the role. I'm actually working with a client, nonprofit client, as a matter of fact, with about 300 employees to help develop their leader curriculum. And they don't have a huge budget. So there are ways that you can get creative with, without just looking to training. Research indicates that 70% of development comes from on-the-job experience, where success matters and something's at stake. So you can get creative in identifying opportunities such as those stretch assignments or special projects that offer some real-time learning and application. Just as competency models should be reviewed regularly for relevance, you can update your curriculum as well. And you may leverage resources and get creative in identifying opportunities that fit into your development budget. So even some other ideas under theory or social categories could be book groups, organizing book groups, or even recommending TED Talks or podcasts that are relevant to specific leadership competencies. Ultimately, the key is an easy, user-friendly program, visible framework that provides multiple development options. Okay. So, summing things up, we've discussed how HR and business leaders can be strategic in their talent management and in development of future leaders. And the key is to develop now to prepare for your manager and senior level roles in the future. So here's a summary of best practices. And of course, you want to obtain or ensure that you have executive leadership buy-in and support, and make sure as an HR person in the organization that you're able to articulate and state the business case. And again, relying on some data points and metrics are important, especially around retention and company performance. Second, conduct analysis of talent against the need for future competencies. So we talked about how important when you're looking at development is to look at the future needs of the business based on the business plan. Assessing performance and potential through thoughtful and strategic talent reviews. So implementing some type of process for really identifying who those high potential employees are that you're going to invest in development. And then provide a visible and accessible framework for cultivating those high performers with leadership capabilities and aspirations. Additionally, to ensure impact, you'll want to measure the results of your programs, specifically in the areas of skill development, engagement and retention, production, performance, and promotions. So not only the readiness, but what are the resulting promotions. So this is really why establishing those data points and benchmarks up front is so important. Okay? So that concludes my presentation. I hope you gained at least one bit of information or some insight from this webinar. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen. And now I will hand it over to Brandon to moderate any questions that might have come up.
Thank you, Susie. Great job. We're getting a few questions in, and I just want to remind folks that they can go to the chat window and add a question, and we'll kind of filter those as they come through. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best to work through them. So we'll kick it off with the first one, Susie. Earlier in the presentation you mentioned you probably want to have a max 10 to 15 competencies per role. How do you think you would develop current employees based on those competencies in terms of do you focus on one at a time? Do you try to develop all of those competencies all at once, or is it short-term thinking or long-term thinking from that perspective?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a good question, because especially if you have you're introducing for the first time 15 competencies, it can be a bit overwhelming. So it's all about how you're introducing, when you're implementing this competency model, it's how are you introducing it to the organization. So, I guess one consideration or concern would be, okay, we're doing new performance reviews, here are your competencies, and we're going to hold everybody accountable and measure right now your success in all these competencies. Well, while that may make sense, you may need to take more of an initial development approach to it. So you can say, okay, here's the business case, here's where the business is going, this is why we've developed these competencies, and we're going to start, we've created some development options similar to the curriculum that I showed you to help people develop in those areas. And then it goes back to the supervisors and managers to start setting expectations and goals around their employees' development around those competencies. So of course some folks will have strengths in certain areas and maybe some weaknesses or opportunities in other areas. So it's building specific development plans, even if it's not a leadership type program, but it's building performance development plans for each individual as part of your performance management process to leverage the strengths for each of the competency areas and then also help shore up some of the gaps. And that's why it's so critical to have some resources and some recommendations, whether it be available training, self-study, mentoring, assignments internally that you can readily offer those employees, probably before you implement them even. I hope that answered the question.
I think that was pretty thorough. We appreciate it, Susie. And going back to assessing the current talent within the organization, what are really some good ways or good tools maybe to facilitate a 360 review? I imagine that's a pretty good component as far as assessing the talent you actually have within the organization from, across the organization.
Yeah, it can be really useful for assessing hypos, but also just ongoing leadership development for people who are in leadership roles. So the key with 360 reviews is really having a third party, and it could be internal HR, but having someone who is familiar with the 360 process, really structure some questions and maybe even do some interviews to really glean from key stakeholders in the organization how this person is performing against the competencies or the how they're achieving results based on the business objectives. Okay, so having someone who can coordinate that process, getting a good representation of key stakeholders to get input for that employee, and then really looking at trends and themes for that individual in terms of their strengths and opportunities and kind of feeding that data back to the person so that they can structure their own development plan around that. So that's kind of the general best practice way to do it.
And for our next question, in a situation where it would be very difficult to fill the current leadership positions within the current talent pool due to the organizational structure, do you think it's best to first determine what you want the structure to be, or should we first consider how to best utilize the current talent pool?
Yeah, so when I hear that, I think of organizational design, and a lot of times when people are trying to structure roles and responsibilities within their organization to meet the growth demands, they're looking at the people internally and trying to figure out how those people can fit within that picture. And I would encourage people to kind of step back from what's going on internally and just clearly focus on, okay, going into the future, when you're doing that needs assessment and gap analysis, going into the future, what does our organization need to look like? Like, what are the skills and competencies, and including the work that needs to be done for us to be successful? So really painting that picture, that vision, and then identifying, what are the the roles, associated with. What do those look like? And then, of course, you can compare that to your current supply of talent, and it's very likely, especially if you're a growing organization, that you're going to have to attack it on two fronts. So growing people from within, but also looking to the outside to attract some other folks, especially with some unique or special skill sets.
The next question is more about communicating the development programs. So what, in your mind, Susie, is a good way to provide feedback or have that ongoing planning conversation about the development with the employees that you see as high potentials and want to develop in the future?
Well, first of all, the whole company everybody in the company should have visibility to the competencies associated with every role in the organization. And they need to see why those competencies are relevant as it relates to the strategic direction. And then, like I said, there needs to be some program that's visible that's in writing or it's available, on your intranet or whatever type of communication mechanisms you have, and certainly in regular performance conversations between supervisors and employees, where people can see, okay, if I'm looking to advance in this organization and I'm interested in this particular area, these are the competencies associated with each position in that stage of that career path. And then here's some development recommendations for how I can gain those skills and abilities. So ideally, you can have some global communication around it, like you would communicating any of your HR programs. But I guess the key component would be that relationship between the supervisor and the employee, and having those regular ongoing performance discussions as you're understanding what motivates that person, what their career aspirations are, and making sure that they see a plan for their future. And that's really key for retention, because if people don't see that there's even opportunities for challenging work, a lot of the younger employees aren't so necessarily even concerned with moving up the ladder, but then they're looking at more of a scaffolding approach. So, okay, well, what if I want to move to a different track? Maybe, I've been doing, production or manufacturing, and now I've realized I'm really creative and I want to go into product development or marketing or whatever. They need to be able to see their options in that area and what they can do to build the necessary skills to basically grow in the company. So really, I guess, to bottom line, and it's that relationship with the supervisor and employee and that ongoing communication about what their future opportunities are, and then having the tools to implement them.
Great. The next question we have is about the mentorship programs that you had mentioned earlier. So in talking about mentoring from outside the company, how do you go about setting up mentor programs for the high-level leadership and to partner with a skilled, knowledgeable person that could be a mentor outside of the organization?
Yeah, well, I would say, if you're an executive manager of the team or even a HR person in a director or VP role, networking is huge. I mean, networking and collaborating with other professionals in this market is so important for so many reasons. Not only for building your business and also your pool of talent, but really in identifying potential mentors. So I think the more you network with other professionals, even along the lines of your industry, you develop those relationships, you may be able to invite or ask those folks. It could even be someone who, like I mentioned, is retired and who's now even maybe just dabbling in consulting or looking to do something part-time that really wants to give back to the profession or the industry. And so it's really leveraging those resources and looking at those relationships. And if you have the relationship, you have a better sense, too, of the personality style and how they might fit with certain hypos within your organization or even existing leaders within your organization.
And maybe could you take it one step further? How do you match, and maybe you don't necessarily have to, but how closely do you have to match the competencies that you're trying to develop with that mentor that you're going to match with the high potential or leader within the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the mentor should have some sense of and information around that individual, the mentee, so to speak, or the protege's goals. So what is their development plan? What is their goals? How can that mentor be a resource and help them, help support and steward that person in their personal development? So I think, yes, they do need to have visibility to the development plan, which of course should be tied to growing their skills and competencies for the leadership role that they're aspiring to take on. And maybe it's even just focusing on the core leadership competencies that have been identified by the organization.
Great. I think we have time for one question, maybe two, depending on how long this last one goes. Susie, I think you'll love this last question. Give us some ideas for some free or low-cost ways to develop for certain competencies. I think you had mentioned earlier, like TED Talks or podcasts. Mm-hmm. What are some ways like that, and how do you match to certain competencies?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get creative sometimes. So when there's little to no budget. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned like organizing book groups. I mean, especially younger folks love those affinity type groups. It's a real engagement thing where, you know, in Xenium here, we have a book group, and it's totally organized internally by the group, and they decide on various business type books that they read, and then they sit around and discuss. So there's not only that self-study theoretical component, and there's also the social aspect of how, you know, how are you applying and relating this to the work you do. Again, the key is that everybody in the organization, including the individual, should have a sense for the competencies and what the success profile for their role, or maybe a future aspired role, looks like, so that they are seeking out study that's related, relevant. So that's one way. Again, you know, networking, looking for you know, people in the community that are looking to mentor or give back and maybe willing to do some coaching or training for low cost is an option. Podcasts, you know, Harvard Business Review, you can sign up for a subscription for various podcasts. So it does take some research. It generally falls in HR's hands to really do some digging and research some options that are really relevant to the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're trying to develop. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the options I offered, I mean, time is a valuable resource, but the job rotation, the participation on task force to solve some business problem or special project, stretch assignments, researching different media, those are all ways that really don't necessarily cost a lot of money, but it really kind of boils down to being customized for the organization. So it's probably going to fall into the hands of the manager or the HR, or even if you have a HR partner like Xenium or even an OD consultant help out with that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Susie, and thank you all for your questions. Just as a reminder, we will follow up with an email either later today, likely tomorrow, though, with the recording, the slides, and perhaps even the audio track for this webinar. If you want to get a hold of us, info@xeniumhr.com is a great email address to reach us at. We're constantly monitoring that, and we'll respond to you as soon as possible. You can also go to xeniumhr.com and subscribe to our email updates, and you'll get great event updates that we have on a monthly basis, and then our newsletters and other content-related items as well. So want to thank everybody for attending, and again, Susie, great job on the presentation. We all appreciate the expertise there. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.